Well, congrats to everyone who made it through term. Now take a deep breath and just rest for a second. Okay, now let's talk about your lease-up plan for 2020. Isn't it crazy how quick we have to change gears in the student housing industry? So seriously, what's your plan? What's your plan for renewals? What's your digital strategy? How are you going to get in front of more international students? How are you going to leverage social media? What is going to get students' attention this year? Every marketing plan for each property is going to be different, but one thing that should be consistent in every marketing plan is listing your property on Unilodgers. Why? Because Unilodgers has a 10-year history and an infrastructure for getting in front of more international students than any other listing platform. Another reason why, unlike other listing services, you don't pay a monthly listing fee and have no guarantee of an ROI. You only pay Unilodgers a fee once a student moves in. Not sign a lease, but once the resident has actually moved in. So what is there to lose? Visit the link in the show notes or go to unilodgers.com/contact-us. That's UNILODGERS.com/contact-us. And get your property listed today. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we're putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees, and joining me today is the wonderful Greta Dare.
Ooh, I'm wonderful. Can you always say something nice before you say my name? I love that.
How are you doing?
Wonderful, the glorious, I can't think of anything else. The brilliant. Oh my God, say brilliant.
The brilliant.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite descriptor in the whole world.
I thought the was your greatest descriptor.
That's not a descriptor. That's an actual name. That's a nickname. But if we're talking in terms of adjectives, then brilliant is my all-time favorite, top, best. Yeah. Anyway, way too much time spent on that. We're totally moving on because now I'm completely embarrassed. That went from fun to embarrassing really quickly. Anyway, I'm doing
if you're a new audience member and you don't get the reference to the WAS, it has to do with our community, our online community that Greta created. It is absolutely outstanding.
To create because she's never satisfied with anything ever.
So yeah, if you're not a member of the SHI community, where you can get all your student housing news and job posts and upcoming events, make sure that you go to studenthousinginsight.com and click on the member login up in the upper left-hand corner and sign in.
It's in the upper right-hand corner, by the way.
What's that?
It's in the upper right-hand corner.
You're right. It's in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, if you're not on there, get on there. And by the way, if you are on there and you haven't actually posted your profile picture, I'm judging you. Just so you know, I spent a lot of time on that site. Put your profile picture on there. Interact. Do those things. Do the things. Anyway, yeah. All right.
Yeah, there are a few people who put their profile pictures.
There are. I really wanted to go through and I wanted to comment on some of my favorite profile pictures because we have some really, really great ones on there. Some of them are so fun. And mine are lame because I use the same two pictures across all 3 social media platforms or anything everywhere. It's the same 2 pictures that you will ever find of me. I do that intentionally. But some people have some really awesome pictures of themselves on. They're just so fun and interesting. And I'm almost wanted to put a post and it's who has the best, most creative, fun, expressive profile pictures?
And make sure that you're tuning into our Instagram page as well, because
Kristen's amazing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're introducing her on a podcast before this one or after this one, but Kristen Hahn, who was previously with Cardinal Group and joined us recently, she's just taken it.
She went nuts, man. Yeah.
She's just taking it to a whole nother level. But anyway, outside of that, this episode is being recorded after turn. And we're already at the date of this recording, we're at August 23rd. And everyone's already pretty much through move in.
Congratulations, everybody, for making it through turn, by the way. Great job, no matter what happened. Congratulations, you're alive. We're so proud of you.
I know there's a few, universities out there here in the U.S. and then obviously around the world that will end up starting in September. And good luck to you guys that have to do that in September. But yeah, now it's everybody's occupancy is, starting to shake out and people are understanding what their impact of no shows is actually going to have and that type of thing. And
no shows.
Yeah. And then looking at consolidating so that, you don't have one person in a 4-bedroom unit, right? And that ends up creating some other opportunities for ancillary income, which is putting them on the short-term rental market, kind of like Airbnb. So, Greta, have you ever had any experience with listing completely vacant units on Airbnb or bookings.com or anything like that? No,
absolutely not.
I have. And let me tell you, it's like having turn all over again, like several times during the week.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I told you that. I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Yeah. I had a property that was in my portfolio that was in Austin, Texas. Of course, Austin's got the big 2-week South by Southwest that festival that happens.
Oh my, I couldn't even imagine.
And yeah, we had some vacant apartments and it made sense. And fortunately we had somebody that knew a little, knew how to, because she had her own investment properties in Austin and she was kind of doing the same thing and she helped us navigate it. But man, oh man, and I only got to see it from a distance. I happened to be down there kind of on the tail end of it. And it was just, it was a nightmare. I mean, it's just a lot to manage and not so much. I mean, it's, there's nothing that's hard about it. It's just very time consuming. And it's not something that, your professional full-time staff are the ones that have to take care of it, not your student part-time staff. It just requires much more hands-on. And it's not something where, you can kind of leave a checklist and have your part-timers take care of it. This is something that, it takes, you're working like a hotel. So it takes that type of intensity. So
wait, no, before you describe this company, this is why I actually want to preface this with a couple of things really quickly before you jump into it. And it's that it's really important that everybody just paid attention to everything that Wes said and then more. If you somehow missed that this is a very specific organization or, business model that is being introduced in this interview, this is not an episode that's going to be specific of if you have vacant units, the solution is to just throw them up on Airbnb and get some, order some Amazon basic towels and sheets and go get, some dishes from TJ Maxx and all of your occupancy no-show problems are solved. That is not what this episode is. So if they're like, if I can get a record scratch right here, that's not what this episode is, because what needs to be realized, and it was funny because when I first started listening to the episode, I am a terrible human. And I was like, oh, is that what this is about? No, it's not. Because I had a 1.5 pages worth of notes and I told Wes this of all of the reasons why that can be so incredibly difficult. And if somebody would have proposed that to me in any of my previous positions, I would have, had a dead look on my face and been like, absolutely not, because of all of the difficulties associated with that, because it isn't simple, it isn't easy, and there's so much to take into consideration from the multitude of people that will be coming in and out of your community, to the check-in process, the checkout process, the communication, the follow-up, the billing, the possible damages, the issues that arise during their stay. All of this stuff is all stuff that has to be
the tax liability,
the regulations, the laws. Don't think that this is something that just solves your occupancy problems and that this is just something you can do with Airbnb or HomeAway or Vrbo or any of those. It isn't, and that your on-site manager can just solve this and, you just download the app and put it on there and it's super easy for game weekend and, that's no problem at all. It is a problem. There's a reason why there's a whole business built around hosts who do this, and it isn't super easy. So really take that into consideration. There's a whole business that built a model around this. And that's why there's huge regulations in cities and states and counties about when and where this is allowed and why. And that this specific podcast is about a company that's built it specifically for our types of properties to make it manageable for us, for you. And that is the company that you amazingly found, that amazingly exists and amazingly covers what sounds like literally every objective or objection that I had in my head.
Well, I appreciate that. And of course, as you can imagine, I'm sure we had a lot of the same questions that immediately came up in our head, right? So, this is coming out of a practical place. I do asset management for other clients, and, I've got a couple of properties that one's not struggling that bad. A couple of the others are really, and we knew there were going to be occupancy issues. It was a turnaround project. So, we knew that this was ultimately going to come. We've been talking about since March and April, really working with the site team to say, hey, let's make sure we're consolidating and keeping this open, because for two reasons. One, it allows you to control the utility expenses on those fully vacant apartments, because you can't really do that when you've got one person that's occupying a 4-bedroom, because you're cooling the entire place. Mm-hmm. And it's not, if you're one of those people who think, well, we can just close off the other vents in the other rooms. No, you're actually going to end up causing more problems if you do that. So,
that's not how this works.
That's not how that works. But yeah, over that process of, saying, okay, we know we're going to end up with this, I immediately kind of began a search of trying to find a group out there that manage short-term rentals, because some of these properties are very small, and because of that, they've got a small staff, and to put that on them seemed like it was going to be, not worth its time and would not be done very well. And anyway, came across Vector Travel and reached out to Mickey, and Mickey actually sent me some information on a recent article that he did within student housing. Actually, I think I've got that backwards. I think maybe he reached out to me first, but we were kind of in that process of finding it.
Communication happened.
Yeah. So anyway, Mickey sent me an article that he had written for another blog website, and it was kind of right on. And come to find out, he has a test case in that article for a property in Austin, and come to find out it was the same property that we did the South by Southwest short-term rentals in. So, and what's crazy about that is they've now expanded to, I think, 4 or 5 other properties with that particular property management company, and they're now doing, for that building in Austin, I think they're up to 25 or 30 units that they're doing for this year. So they're certainly happy with that model. And I mean, let's be honest, you would certainly rather have long-term residents in there. It's a better story for the lenders and underwriters if you're trying to sell a property and that type of thing. But in that first month, that property owned 17 studio apartments, made $35,000, and that was their cut after the fees paid to Vector, and of course the booking fees on Airbnb and everything else. So no, I think it's fantastic. They've really thought a lot of things through, not just
many things.
Yeah, not just from the standpoint of the regulation and the accounting and the taxes, as well as the bedding and furniture's needed, which typically isn't student housing. But they even went to the extent of putting in noise aware, which is a decibel meter rating type of equipment that will give them. Did you like that? I think that's a thing, right?
Yes. Your descriptors of things are always my favorite.
Well, Mickey will explain it. I don't need to go into it.
No, but that was the amazing thing is that it was like I said, when I first sat down and I was a jerk and I didn't realize that this was a specific company that basically was like, here's all of the possible issues. And therefore we have to solve all of the possible issues, in order to service this particular, business or this industry. And so I'm scribbling out all of my notes and I'm like, these are all the reasons why this would be difficult or, more difficult for the on-site team. And we're creating more work and blah, blah, blah. And it's like I'm going through one by one and I'm like, oh, okay, they take care of that. Oh, okay, they solve that. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Oh, and it was like, the noise decibel reading machine, as you so eloquently described it. But no, it was, that was part of it. And, it was every one of my concerns that would have immediately had me shut this whole idea down was completely kind of just obliterated. It's everything is managed and thought of. And that's incredible. This solves an enormous amount of problems. It solves the occupancy issue, but their whole business model is built around that. So I know that I'm pretty sure there's a couple of different, there might be a couple of different companies that do this type of thing. And then, like I said, there's obviously the option, the very poorly chosen option, in my professional opinion, to just throw it up on one of the other services, which I absolutely recommend fully against for very strong, obvious reasons. And then there's other options for other companies out there, but this one, because of all of the multitude of areas that they have covered in such good ways, this is a great, great solution to short-term occupancy issues at the beginning of the year or throughout the year, as it progresses, all the way down to if you start being able to backfill, as spring leases, if you start to be able to get short-term leases in the spring, they've got a solution for that too. It was like they really kind of thought of it all, which was incredible to me.
Yeah. I think probably the key thing, because there are other companies out there that do this, but the one thing that really sets Vector apart is what they've got on the ground as far as infrastructure with regional managers that can go to a property if and when needed. So that's huge. Yeah. I mean, if you've got to do this, do you really want to have to have your property manager respond to a noise issue at 1:00 in the morning over a short-term stay?
Exactly. And that was, again, one of the things that was on the list. So I guarantee you guys, anything that you have in your mind that you're thinking of right now, I had in my mind, Wes had in his mind, and Wes, it came up one way or another between the two of us. So it definitely is going to be in this episode. I will say, and this is something that I mentioned, there is one point of contention that I do ultimately have that I do, this is a great business model. This is a great idea. It's a great solution to an overwhelming problem that we've all faced in this industry. By the way, just in case anybody's feeling lonely, in their struggle right now, we've all been there. But something to keep in the back of your mind is the resident experience, right? While there are so many solutions to this, all of your concerns are, met with a solution as this episode plays on. One thing to keep in the back of your mind is that they are still short-term people. They are still, overnight stays. They might be 2 or 3 days. They might be 2 weeks. They might be 3 weeks. We don't know, it's for however long they book. And there are a ton of safety measures that are put in place. That's wonderful. However, it still might be a different demographic. They are still being, dependent upon your agreement. They may be given full access to amenities. And so they're still going to be interacting with your residents. They're still going to be walking down hallways with your residents. They're still going to be, in some way, manner or another, they're still going to be there. And so it's really a matter of just knowing that in the back of your mind and saying, does this meet our mission? Does this meet our promise to our residents, to our parents, and to the community and the university that which we service? And if it does, then you are good. And if you feel good about it, then that's great. I'm not saying that like, well, if it does, wink. I'm legitimately saying that. It may very well. And if it does, there's nothing against you if it does. There are a lot of contingencies that you can put in place and a lot of contingencies that already exist within this business model that make this perfectly acceptable. So these are all things to keep in mind.
And just so, you'll hear it in the podcast. What you're referring to is I made the comment to Mickey that, obviously parents, I think, are going to have some concern if they've signed a lease and without knowledge up front that, there's going to be this transient environment that's going to be there as well with short-term rentals. And I made the comment that, I don't think it bothers the students as much because they're kind of used to the technology and
I fully disagree with that.
Used to booking on Airbnb for spring breaks and things like that. No, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I'm just saying that compared to their parents, I think they're probably going to be a little bit more accepting of it. But I mean, again, that's just my thought. And also being based off of, what Mickey has experienced up to this point, but every property is a little bit different.
Well, and I think we're coming from two different perspectives, even just given, our two different gender perspectives, you know. So I can
absolutely.
Yeah. But, I think that from that perspective, there are potentially going to be students who, and those are things to keep in mind. There might be students who see that or learn about that and those are things that I'm saying that these are things to have in the back of your mind when you are taking this into consideration. Are there going to be people, and even the location of the fully vacant apartment, are there going to be residents nearby who are going to be potentially uncomfortable with that? And potentially rightfully so. You don't know who all of the people are that are going to be staying in that. So keep that stuff in the back of your mind. And is that going to be reflected in your reviews? Is that going to be reflective in your word of mouth? Is that something that these people are going to be comfortable with?
Yeah. And I don't know that you truly know until you get, you got to weigh the negatives and the positives. I mean, Absolutely. If your property sitting at 60% right now, I don't know that you've got
recommending against it by any stretch. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that you've got any other choice, but to look at doing this. So let's cut to the interview really quick, and we'll in the outro we've got a couple of things that we need to go over, including some reminders on those other things that you should be doing right now if you've got vacancy that you need to fill.
So listen all the way to the end for real.
Mickey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Wes. Happy to be here.
Well, it's a perfect timing because we are right at the end of everyone's move in and everybody's kind of seeing where their occupancy is ending up. I know when days when I was on site, even if you got to 100%. There just wasn't always, that you never really had a comfort feeling that everybody was going to show up.
Sure.
And if you've been through that before, obviously those folks that have done that understand the importance of a waiting list. And then there's others that, I've got some properties that I'm working on right now from an asset management standpoint, and there's some oversupply this year, and not just with our property, but the entire market. And so we began conversations several months ago. When I say we, I mean, myself and those particular property managers of, okay, this is just the reality. There's oversupply in this market. And we've got to figure out other ways that we can make up some other ancillary income, short-term leases, that type of thing. I say short-term leases, I mean semester-long leases or, something to that effect. But there's another thing that has been going on that makes a lot of sense for student housing. And that's more of a transient, short-term rental with Airbnb and other similar type of platforms that are out there. And, especially in student housing, it makes a lot of sense when there are things like graduations and concerts and football games, especially if you're in the Southeast, really anywhere, but especially the Southeast, because, the hotels, and there's not enough hotels in those markets to cover those types of weekends. Anybody that's ever had to go to Clemson for a football game knows about the 30 to 45 minute drive they've got to make to Greenville, South Carolina in order to find accommodations. So a lot of property managers have been toying around with that idea of putting a completely vacant unit because it's already furnished. So there's just really a few things you need to get in regards to linens and a cleaning service and plates and things like that for the kitchen that really, from what I've talked to several, the customers that have rented, for a game day weekend or whatever, have really enjoyed it. And so it's a great way to pull in some ancillary rental income. And Mickey, your business is all about doing that.
That's right.
Vector Travel, we'll get into a little bit more about how your platform is working with the student housing properties, but really quick, just give everybody kind of the origin story of Vector Travel and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. So the background of Vector is, it really predates Vector, which goes back to as early as 2013. I co-founded another business called rented.com, a marketplace that sought to connect residential assets with short-term rental operators like Vector is today. And that was really all around the lease model, specifically the corporate lease model. And that eventually overlapped with the multifamily industry and then the subgroup of student housing. And basically that entailed either the rented capital fund or one of our clients going out, leasing a block of units. So maybe 10 units, with the purpose of monetizing those units via the short-term rental industry. So platforms like Airbnb, HomeAway, Booking.com, Expedia, then their own booking site with their own repeat guests, and earning a margin on that. So we call that the lease arbitrage approach. So I was heavily steeped in that for years. And through that experience, I had the idea of doing what Vector does today, which is to go out and partner with multifamily companies more broadly, including student housing companies, on their vacant units. So coming in basically as a fee management partner, activating those spaces and generating ancillary income, solving vacancy loss, and in certain cases, and I mean, frankly, ideally, returning a rent premium to our clients even after our fees and expenses. And so the company was founded in early 2018. I founded it with a former client of mine, an existing operator, and we set about solving this problem for our clients. And from the beginning, we've taken a client-driven approach, which has led us into some strange markets, and has also led us into multiple student housing properties, just because that pain point that you touched on already is felt so greatly after the semester starts. There's not a whole lot that can be done around the units that were missed in the lease-up process. And so we've been able to come in, activate those spaces for our clients, as you said, layering on a little bit of professional design, additional housewares, and then our level of service and expertise around distribution, revenue management, customer service, and housekeeping, and even the accounting. And we've been doing that for our clients, and it's been growing really rapidly.
So you mentioned there kind of the two different models, the typical master lease type model, where another group that's leasing those units will turn around and put that on the short term market with Airbnb, Expedia, Bookings.com, that type of thing. And that's very much like a corporate lease agreement that I've done
Oakwood
in the past.
Or something. Right.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. And then there's your model where you're basically doing it on a fee basis. Can you dig into that just a little bit more on kind of what the split of the fees are and what it is that you started talking a little bit there from a turnkey standpoint, but can you really kind of walk the listeners through, what it is that you guys do from, cradle to grave with listing their units?
Sure. Well, yeah, and I can say a little bit more on the corporate lease approach as well. And, I think that is still the default within the kind of the confluence of the multifamily and the short-term rental industries, which is this corporate lease approach. Why is that? I think it's more driven from the multifamily side of things than from the short-term rental side of things. I think the short-term rental operators have had to adjust to what the norms were within the multifamily space. And just as we said, it's much like an Oakwood or something traditional corporate lease approach. They've tried to mirror that as closely as they could, despite the fact that they were monetizing the units in a new way, with processes that would be different to the on-site teams and to the corporate leadership that was ultimately approving those. But I think the time has come for what Vector does, and maybe what some other companies out there either are doing or will do soon, but is coming in with this level of expertise, taking a small piece of the pie and doing all of these services for the multifamily companies. I think part of it is just around needs. So when there's a need, people innovate. But beyond that, I think short-term rentals have just gone more mainstream, even within the multifamily context. So every event I go to now, it is one of the topics, if not one of the main topics at a multifamily conference event. And everyone's looking for their position on it. And it's usually looking for their position on how to profit from it. Now, to get to your question around how do we operate, and I do think this would be anybody that came in with a short-term rental focus as a partner, as a fee management company coming in and activating those spaces. We want to do everything that we can with it. We want it as turnkey as possible. I think the only thing that we don't do for our clients is maintenance, and that is usually just how our clients prefer it. They've already got the on-site maintenance staff, and we can just fit in with their ticketing system. And so, so it does start, even if, student housing unit might be 90% of the way there for short-term rentals. But then that last 10%, you not only have to, have the proper checklist, but you have to do it well too. The right design and the right positioning can make all the difference. If you try to hide the fact that it's a student housing building, for example, then that can lead to guest issues later. That can lead to poor financial results. And then if you undersell it too, that can harm as well. And so really kind of finding somebody that's done that before, that knows how to furnish for it, and then knows how to market those properties online leads to pretty good outcomes. But it's everything from design, setup, photography, the listing creation, all of the guest communications, all of the housekeeping. When there's a guest issue, that's us too. We really strive to do everything independent of the on-site staff.
Well, that's so. I think that's where the huge value comes from a group like yours, because I mentioned we kind of saw the writing on the wall with some of these markets that we were going to see a lot of extra inventory in. And when we had that conversation of with that particular property manager of, hey, let's consolidate as many of the roommates as we can so we can end up with as many vacant units. Two reasons. When I say vacant units, fully vacant units, for two reasons. One, if someone is able to lease it, you're able to lease it a lot quicker if there aren't any other roommates in there. The other thing is to put it out there for short-term rentals like you're doing. And when I had that conversation, or those conversations, the property manager's eyes just kind of got really big. and there's a valid reason. We've trained that person to be a property manager of a student housing community, not of a hotel. And one in particular that I remember having this conversation with had a background in hotel management. And so she knows what has to be done, in order to market and then to make sure that everything is ready for the guests. And it was really tough for her to have that conversation. So, we're excited about, talking with you in regards to those properties. And it's just nice knowing that there's somebody out there with this business model that, can take that on, can really kind of be a partnership with us of trying to get those leased out and take a lot of that headache off. So, yeah,
that's right. I mean, one thing I say about it is, a multifamily company, a student housing company, could do short-term rentals, but they should not. And what I mean by that is basically what you just said, that it's not the role that the on-site team signed up for. It's really a hospitality function, not a property management function. And then with those two kind of points as the framework for it, it permeates everything from the software stack to your standard, operating procedures, to how you interact with the guests, and then what the turnaround time is on issues or questions or whatever. And so, this is a 24/7, 365-day business. Once a unit comes online, it's online forever unless there's a maintenance issue or the contract doesn't get renewed. And so yeah, it would be interesting if a company had, maybe a hotel arm to it. I suspect they'd have a leg up on doing it directly in-house, but it would still be an adjustment, and they'd really have to invest in it fully for it to work.
Yeah, yeah. So, one, I don't think we talked about the fee structure.
Oh, yeah.
Can you kind of give us an overview of what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So we start with 75% to our client, 25% to us, and what does that mean? That's a fully loaded net fee breakdown. So it is net of platform fees, but then that pool of money that's left over, we do all of the accounting for that. We pay out on a monthly basis. And, with that, we're covering our software expenses. We're covering all of our labor expenses, all of our management, travel, all of that. None of that is being billed back to the client, and including housekeeping, all of that is baked in, right? So that's the breakdown. And then if we were actually furnishing at our expense, then it's a slightly different breakdown, with us taking a larger share just to cover those furniture expenses. But in the student housing use case, it really doesn't tend to apply, with the exception of the housewares and linens.
Gotcha. So now let's kind of walk through the other side of it. Say we do that through the, a student manager does that through the fall semester, and there's always the opportunity to pick up some additional leases from people that are transferring in, that type of thing, from going into spring semester. Kind of walk us through, as far as, kind of disengaging a unit with the Vector platform. What does that entail? And you can kind of walk us through that. Yeah.
So it's, back to us being a partner in this whole approach. We don't look at it as a negative necessarily to lose inventory when it's for a positive reason, such as, a longer term lease for our client. In fact, we facilitate leasing activities in the units that we're managing for our clients. So, even in market rate buildings where we'll have perhaps a unit available and the on-site team doesn't have the same floor plan to show, we'll allow them to show a prospective tenant our unit, which has been professionally furnished and is professionally cleaned. And we've facilitated a number of leases in our buildings. In the student housing context, we've dealt with that exact scenario even just last month. And it was simply a process of the client giving us notice that the leasing activity was picking up and that we should essentially start winding down the activities. So things like blocking the calendars from future bookings, unwinding certain bookings if they were very far out, and then the ones that were kind of in a midterm, near to midterm period, just servicing those, collecting the final revenues, doing the payout, physical walkthrough of the units, and then just a give back of everything. And so a pretty easy and seamless process.
Gotcha. So, and what are the other fees? Because, there's a 75-25 split. I get that, but that's on the net. So there's obviously booking fees to, the platforms, Airbnb, bookings.com, those places. What are some of those typical fees that are coming off of that, that nightly rental amount? Yeah,
it's a good question. However, I do like to remind everyone that really these platforms are the major drivers of bookings now for short-term rentals, and they have all of the SEM dollars in the world to spend. Mm-hmm. And so generally speaking, it's best just to focus on the net and chalk it up to a cost of doing business on these platforms. That said, they range anywhere from about 10% up to as much as you want to pay, pretty much on a platform like Expedia, where you're essentially bidding for your placement. Now, there's certain things that you can do in terms of how quickly you respond, how well you respond, what the overall reviews are, professional photography, word count, all of these different things to optimize across different platforms. They all have their own algorithms. They all have some opacity around that, where at times we have to guess, at times we work with our account reps on what are the best practices. But yeah, so they are somewhat healthy. Obviously, the direct bookings, is basically just the cost of credit card processing involved with that. So those are ideal. We do that with all of our properties. We always have a building level website, and we frame those as guest suites for the residents. So friends and family want to come to town, they can book directly on there. We give them a coupon code to incent them to do so. And so that works out pretty well. Beyond that, we're not in the business of feeing guests or clients to death, there is a cleaning fee, but that's generally a pass-through expense for us. And so, whatever we're collecting there, we're paying in terms of housekeeping service and then supplies. We provide guests with things like boxed water, just as part of that hospitality function. And so that goes to fund initiatives like that as well. But yeah, I mean, the majority of the revenue we push into the rental income pool, which does get split up between the client and us, generally 75% to them, 25% to us.
Gotcha. So now I'm going to put my CFO cap on, because everything you've said sounds fantastic. It's a great way of, bringing in some additional revenue and trying to get the property, to the economic occupancy that it was probably originally underwritten for. But all those things that Vector is taking care of, I know someone's going to have that question, because I had that question because I've ran into it in the past, is governmental requirements. Mm-hmm. Everything from zoning and special municipal overlays that the cities sometimes have in these university areas can, sometimes keep that from even happening. And then on the other side of that, the taxes, because a lot of times a lot of these cities will have hotel tax or some type of short-term tax that's outside of what these property managers are used to paying from a sales tax standpoint. So how involved does Vector get in that process and making sure that that it's even legal to do it, and for the specific property, and then B, kind of with that, we touched a little bit on the accounting, but want to understand from that tax standpoint if you're taking care of that liability as well. Yeah,
great question. So on the front end, with any opportunity, there's usually a conversation, essentially a back and forth around the scope of services and general viability. We basically, you could call it underwriting. We basically underwrite a property on both levels. One is regulatory fit. And so, yeah, you're right to point out, there's short-term rental regulations, and then there are also specific zoning codes that sometimes can supersede the short-term rental regulations. And unfortunately, with the exception of maybe a state like Arizona, it varies municipality to municipality. The reason I point out really Arizona is it's they've made it illegal for the municipalities to ban short-term rentals. So at a state level, it is allowed. But yeah, so we have to dig into that, and we have a great lawyer who's been in the short-term rental industry for 6+ years, and then we've been others on the team have been steeped in it as well. So we always review that, and then we do a short-term rental income projection based on the comparable data. And so those are really the kind of the two levels of underwriting. And then we come back with recommendations. There's almost always a path to doing it legally. That just may entail a conditional use permit, which most likely, if somebody's looking at trying this for a limited period of time with a small set of units, probably isn't worth doing. If they think that it will be part of their longer term strategy and maybe be permanent or semi-permanent use, then it would be. But yeah, so we'll always study that, and just part of being the partner, we do all of that work for them. Now, on the occupancy tax side, the short-term rental taxes, hotel-like taxes, you're right, we do all of the accounting around that. Then it comes down to, if there is a short-term rental permit, whose name is the permit in? So if it's in the client's name, then those funds are going to go generally to the client and then remitted. If the permits are pulled by or acquired by Vector, then we'll handle that entire process soup to nuts. So we'll collect it, we'll account for it, and we'll report and pay. Gotcha. Okay. Well, now let me take the CFO hat on and put on the parent hat. I think a lot of operators are probably, ultimately at the end of the day, our renters that are students most of them have parents that are, the biggest concern is their safety and security. And when you're talking about, commingling long-term residents with more transient residents who, typically, you look at any area that has a large transient population, I guess is the best way to put it. Mm-hmm.
there's typically a concern with that because they're just in and out and you don't really know who's who and that type of thing. I don't think it bothers the students so much because, they use Airbnb. They're kind of used to that platform when they do their own travel, be it for spring break or whatever. But I could tell you most parents are going to have, some kind of immediate concern with it. Having a company like Vector who really specializes in this type of platform, I think could certainly help parents feel a little bit more comfortable. What is it that your company does that would help parents get comfortable with the idea of neighbors who are, maybe just there for one night?
Yeah. Yeah. Trust and safety is always a concern with any multifamily building. I mean, almost every building that we work with has some form of controlled access, and so that is the framework within which we work in market rate and student housing buildings, and it is a consistent concern. Now, back to our approach, we do take this partnership approach. So when a client wants us to ensure that we're only allowing certain guests in, we don't do credit checks because it's generally irrelevant. The payments are made in advance. And so if there's a payment issue, then we can suss that out on the front end before the person ever gets there. But more on the background check side, we can, generally post-booking, pre-stay, run the background check. Believe it or not, platforms like Airbnb do background checks, do a level of it, and I've I've read that, and I've had those conversations with their multifamily group as well. The extent of that is unknown, but otherwise, we do what we can to control that. That said, there are limitations to everything. When a resident leases a unit, they may pass everything and then bring in a guest that is, that might have a criminal record that would not have passed that background. The same thing can occur with the short-term rental space. We do what we can, if there is an issue. It's also about, how do we react and how do we manage that? And we do have protocols for, intervening with any kind of problem guest and getting them removed.
So Mickey, this is kind of what is playing out in my head, and I think would be playing out in most of the property managers' heads, in regards to this. Let's just set up the scenario. All right, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's there's a lot of extra inventory in that market, so perfect market to talk about using a platform like Vector. And what I could see is kind of that first ball game. There's I think one of the typical users would probably be someone kind of post-grad, 23 to 28 years old, that's coming in town to kind of have a reunion with a lot of his buddies. And, they end up booking through Vector or on Airbnb. And after the ball game, it turns into reliving their college days, right? And not that every other student's not going to be, partying, but it's a little bit different for a property manager when it comes to their residents. Kind of walk me through what, get me comfortable with how Vector works with the property manager and the things you guys have in place to really help in those type of situations. Yeah.
Well, it starts when there's a physical key and a physical fob. We do have a secure locker system that we use, which ensures only the resident who booked has access to it, checks that out. So we know where that key and fob, at least, were checked out and when and to whom. Gotcha. And so it sort of starts there. Then when this 25-year-old comes back after the game, screaming RTR and, drinking lots of beers and getting rowdy in the room, we also use a bit of technology. It's called Noise Aware, and it does not monitor what is said. It simply monitors noise decibel levels in a unit. And when that occurs for any sustained period of time and it reaches the decibel level that we set, oftentimes somewhere between 40 and 50 decibels, we'll get that alert. So if we have 25 plus units in a building, we'll tend to have some kind of on-site staff there at peak times. But if it's, only a handful of units, 5 to 10, usually doesn't make sense to have the person there, so we have boots on the ground in the market. But basically we'd get an alert, we'd reach out to them remotely, we'd escalate that, a second time, phone calls to the guests if they continue to play loud music or, or have any kind of disturbance. And then, the last thing, we'll send somebody over there from our team. If there is an on-site security team, we can loop that in, keep it kind of internal to the property, but also, Vector is there and managing it. And then as needed, we can, and we have removed guests who continue to cause a disturbance. I will say it is incredibly rare. There's something about staying in an apartment that kind of takes the wind out of the party mode. Most people that are booking, it seems, tend to book houses to throw parties, not apartments. The apartment is generally a place to kind of, shower, do some work and sleep, and then from there, that's their launching point. And that is the benefit oftentimes of these student housing properties is their co-location to whether it's the football stadium or even just, the other things that are parts of college towns. They're often extremely walkable.
Yeah. It's very interesting about noise aware. In fact, I'm thinking maybe most of our property managers are probably Googling that right now because they need it in their units for long-term residents as well.
Yeah. I need a Vector code so I can get a commission on that. But yeah, no, definitely. No, we use it. We use it across the board, and we really enjoy the service.
And the other thing with the locker, so I didn't realize that before. So I guess with that locker system, the keys are there. I guess the short-term guest has some type of code or telephone credential or something that allows them to open it, just kind of like an Amazon locker or something.
That's right.
Similar.
That's
to
right.
that.
Yeah. So with each guest, they'll get a unique code, an identifier to go in, and that only opens the locker associated with that unit. And then at checkout time, they're supposed to return it. And then again, that's where our service comes in. We're monitoring that remotely to see, has the key been returned? If not, we're reaching out to the guest saying, hey, it's time to check out. By the way, also, return your key. And then we've also got the boots on the ground, the housekeeping staff that's going to be there to reinforce that.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I'm assuming that the cleaning staff and everything is using that locker system to gain access. So it's not even a situation where they have to come into the office and say, hey, I'm here to clean apartment 101.
Exactly.
They don't even see them unless if they want to, I guess.
Yes, exactly. So again, we want to perform our service, activate this inventory, but really handle everything that we can without involving the on-site team. And so the housekeeping team is going to come in. They're generally going to have, their set of keys or their own codes, and be able to access the building and then be able to access the units that they need to turn on any given day.
Yeah. I tell you, I mean, as a parent of 4, and of course, most of them are a ways away from going to college yet, but
yeah,
that what you explained there, makes a lot of sense. And, seems like there's should be a good way of tracking not everybody that's going in and out, but certainly, the guest that's responsible for what's happening in that unit. So
yeah, and I should mention that as well, so with every client, we built our own basically owner or client portal system. And so whoever has access to that on the client side can have a live look in at any given moment of who is staying in which unit, what their dates of check-in and check-out are, and the financials around the overall performance. So back to us being a partner and striving to be as transparent as possible. That's just one other way that we can do that. We also do other things. If the on-site team wants to know, if they want to have redundancy around that, we can have every time there's a booking confirmation, we can send that to a designated email address, and then they're building their own repository of guest information that they can search or reference as needed, if there's any concern, whether is this a legitimate guest or not.
Gotcha. So, Mickey, the way that you and I first came across each other, I'd read an article on LinkedIn that had been published by shorttermrentals.com. If anybody wants to check that out, it's shorttermrentals with a Z at the end.com. And you were really explaining that, this is an alternative for student housing operators to get some ancillary income from those vacant units that they've got. Two things here. One, I want to make sure that all of the student housing operators understand that this really should only be for completely vacant units. You shouldn't be commingling, within a 4-bedroom apartment. If you've got a vacant bedroom, you really shouldn't be commingling, a short-term stay with that, unless if there's some purpose-built access around your facility that it makes sense for. But for most of the student housing buildings that are out there, I don't think that makes sense. So you definitely want to keep this to the completely vacant units. But in that article, you gave a test case of a company or a property, a building in Austin, Texas. They handed over 17 vacant units, and kind of assuming that, all of those were 4-bedroom units for a second. In the first month of operation, you were able to put back $35,000 in fee income into their pockets. That's $514 a bed per month, which, again, using that 4-bedroom model, if you look in the market today, the market rent there is just a little over $1,000 on a 4-bedroom bedroom. So essentially, you were able to take their economic vacancy and cut that in half for that month. So assuming that client is getting middle of the road rents in Austin, is this something that's pretty typical in this test case, or is this atypical?
So the majority of those units were actually studios, or, in the student housing parlance, 2-bed units. And so the performance was actually better than that. I think there were only 2 4-bed units or 2 bedrooms. And so that was net of, all platform fees, our fees, and, cleaning fees and all of that. So it was purely ancillary income, net income for them. And that was solid. Furthermore, when it's positioned against what would have happened, which is those units would have sat vacant definitely for all of October. And, to your earlier point, maybe they could have been leased or leased again at the turn of the semester, but at least for those next couple of months, they were going to sit vacant. And so we were able to generate those returns. And then we've actually continued to operate in that building. And some of it, I think, is client need driven, or probably the majority, but the rest of it has been around just general performance, where they're happy with the returns on the units we're managing. And so they've actually doubled the unit count that we have. So it'll be at 35 units. And there's talk of increasing that further, which is exciting for us. And I think for the client as well, where they've always seen this potential use in their building based on the zoning.
Yeah. And you and I had a side conversation about that specific property, and it was actually in my portfolio at one time, and we leased it out on Airbnb because we had several floors that were vacant. We leased it out on Airbnb. Gosh, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. For South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were able to make some killer income that week, or those 2 weeks, I should say. But from a management standpoint, if it wasn't for the fact that there was kind of a friend of the management company that was actually doing this in Austin for rental properties that she owned, we would have been very lost, to say the least. So again, I mean, this is just pretty incredible what, being able to put back $35,000, in a month to that property is pretty incredible.
It is. I mean, we're surprised by it as well. And I think as this matures further within the multifamily industry, I do think that the dedication of units to this purpose could become more permanent. I think the income, will be recognized to a greater extent by lenders in the space. That is a concern that folks have right now. I don't think it should play when you're talking about, probably less than 10% of units in most cases, which is generally what you might do with corporate leases anyway. And especially if it's basically to float cash flow through either, 1 or 2 semesters. I don't think that should really factor in the decision-making process. But again, as this becomes even more accepted in the industry, I think it will be part of a longer-term strategy, including the capital partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mickey, thanks for spending the time with us today on explaining what you're doing and just how short-term rental is fitting into the student housing space. This is some valuable information for our folks. If they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? What's your website? What are all the channels they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having us, Wes. Yeah, it's vectorstays.com is the URL, and info@vectorstays.com is probably just the best email address. But we'll turn around response pretty quickly. Even if somebody wants to send in a building and say, hey, is this a good fit for short-term rentals? We have a need here. We'll do what I talked about earlier, which is we'll check out the regulations, and then we'll look at the short-term rental income potential, and then get back to them with our recommendations.
Fantastic, Mickey. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks so much, Wes.
Take care. Well, there you go. I hope I asked all the questions that are going through your mind in regards to short-term rental. And regardless if you decide to use Vector or one of Vector's competitors, or if you're trying to do this yourself, please make sure that you go back and re-listen to this and really kind of, understand kind of all the things that are out there that you need to consider before listing your vacant units on short-term rental markets. So anything else specifically from the interview that you want to talk about? Because I know you've got some other things, Greta, that you want to talk about in regards to things that property should be doing.
I don't even remember those things anymore. That was like 38 minutes ago. I forgot. No, I don't. I think that it was a great interview, and I really still can't believe you thought of in that interview. I just sat there and I was like, Wes thought of that. Wes thought of that. Well done, Wes.
There's a reason I'm a consultant,
Oh, shut up. That doesn't mean you think of everything that I do. There's a reason why we complement each other well.
This is true.
So yes, in regards to other options, and it's not like I have them written down, so it's literally just off the top of my head. There are additional options when you are looking for backfilling, and when you need to get those leases in the door. And the main ones are, you have to remember, there are unfortunately students that do show up. I've learned in my experience who show up without housing. It's the weirdest thing in the world. So don't stop marketing and guerrilla marketing. As again, I mentioned this previously, guerrilla marketing, we did find. So on the ground marketing with flyers, not again, for the 9 billionth time, not just flyers, because this is not 1986 in LA for Guns N' Roses concerts. So guerrilla marketing with flyers with something attached to the flyers, but notifying people that you do currently have open spaces available for people to move into, because there will be people that are looking to move in currently. But beyond that obvious one, there are additional options for that. And that's going to be for the visiting professors. So visiting the university and finding out about any visiting professors that either haven't arrived yet or are still staying in hotels and need that short-term leasing. That is a huge one. Also, if you have any of the hospitals, any nearby hospitals that you have traveling nurses, you have traveling physicians, you have traveling specialists. These people come in and out of the hospitals. They do need short-term stays, and they do need furnished apartments. This was a really huge one, even in standard housing. And so we would have to have the furnished apartments. And so student housing is a very, very viable option. It requires a little bit more marketing on your part, but you can get in the door. I promise you that. And so those are going to be like your biggest leads right there to be able to go get in the door. And so those would be the top ones that I would recommend to be able to go and try to get those leases to start backfilling. And I wish you all the luck, because backfilling in the fall term, it is definitely not the easiest task. So this plus the short-term leasing, those are going to be your most viable options to be able to try and get even, if you can hit 12% additional, I'm going to be impressed.
Yeah, Greta, thanks for mentioning that. I know that it was part of our summer marketing podcast episode that we did as well. So yeah, so definitely go back and check that out if you want more details on that. So let's move on to some other things that are coming up. Now that we're officially into the fall semester, we've got our final 2 SHI regional summits that are coming up this fall. One is coming up very soon on September 10th. So we're, 15, 20 days away from that by the time this podcast comes out. And that's going to be the Southwestern Regional, which is on September 10th. And it is in Waco, Texas. For so many reasons that I'm just not even going to get into, but it's going to be a blast. And I think possibly by the time this podcast goes out, or after this goes out, we're going to be making a major announcement about someone who's going to be speaking.
I like how I know it now. Can I know at least when we're done recording? I love.
Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards, but it's kind of super secret.
Ever kidding, by the way, guys? When I don't ever know what's going on, I literally just go on here and record things.
Yeah, so hopefully we can announce it. We'll certainly announce it on the SHI community and on Instagram. So make sure you're paying attention to that. But we've already got an incredible lineup of panels and speakers. And if you haven't checked that out, please go to studenthousinginsight.com and click on upcoming events and go to that specific tab and you'll get all the information there.
Yeah. And registration. If you haven't bought your ticket yet, what are you doing? This event,
especially if you're in Texas or Oklahoma.
Seriously though, there's no reason to not be going to this event. It is not expensive. It's going to be amazing. There is not another event to make it comparable to. This is the one to go to, like hands down. We have a good number of people that are already going and are coming from places that aren't even actually in Texas, by the way.
And the Southeastern Conference is coming up on October 1st in Charlotte. We're back at the Whitewater Center again. We've got some incredible things that we're going to be announcing pretty soon with that one too. So super excited about that. And if you're in any of the Southeast markets from Georgia to Virginia, including Eastern Tennessee, make sure you get to Charlotte. Make sure you get your folks to Charlotte. If you're a regional manager, or if you're in the C-suite, you've got to start sending your folks to this because the information and just the experience that they're going to get out of it is unlike anything that has been provided before. And I think the content that comes out of this is going to be something that's going to make a huge impact on your teams. Also, we've got an incredible market analysis workshop we've just taken it to a whole nother level. With a recent partnership that we're announcing with College House Research.
So exciting.
There's so many details I wish I could pour out right now. I don't have time to do it on this podcast, but there's a lot of updates and things that are coming out on LinkedIn this week that will give you all of that information. If you haven't checked out collegehouse.com yet, please go do that and look at their research analytics tool. And that'll give you just a little bit of an understanding of what that is going to allow us to do with our and partnering with them for our market analysis workshop. So, Greta, anything else?
I'm just sitting here with like the biggest smile on my face. I just think it's so exciting. That's all. I think these events are incredible and I'm so excited. Like, I'm just so excited. That's it. That's all I got. I got nothing else.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. Again, this podcast is sponsored by Unilodgers. If you do not have Unilodgers as part of your marketing strategy for the 2019-2020 leasing season, make sure you reach out to them this month because honestly, if you want to get listed on their platform for the upcoming leasing season, you need to do that. I've got some incredible specs that Joanna Rell, we're going to be doing a podcast with her in a couple of weeks. And some of we've talked about them on this show for a while. They kind of made a quiet entrance into the U.S. market this year, but the results that they've began telling me about is incredible and can't wait to to have her in to talk about that. So that's coming up as well. Greta, anything else?
Literally nothing, sir. Literally nothing.
All right, guys, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.